then there is a staggering 5-year gap between Ephemera and In Veritas, which is interesting if you look at the rest of the discography. So might be interesting to explain, because in one hand I'm hearing this real cohesion, like, yeah, okay, with Ephemera we're a band, we're doing this together, etc. And I take it you guys did live shows around that time as well to promote it and throw it out there, right? But what happened in those 5 years?
Well, I'm going to take the blame here, because I think it was mostly down to me joining Annihilator, basically.
Okay.
Because in 2015, late 2015, I joined Annihilator. And then, of course, with the touring that involves, and then I've worked on a couple of albums for the band since then, like, it just was kind of tricky to fit everything in and have enough time to, like, write full albums that I was really happy with. And then at the same time, because we had this band dynamic, we'd brought in Alistair Bell on guitars, and he played a few solos on Ephemera.
Okay.
Just because, like, I think it was actually Steve that got in touch with him first, and then, like, turned me onto him, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, we need to get this guy to do some stuff because it's ridiculous. Basically, is how it went.
Okay.
But then Alistair said, like, well, like, I'm not that keen on maybe joining a band that isn't sharing responsibilities and, like, writing duties and stuff like that. So I think it was kind of a mixed bag of me being busy with Annihilator stuff, and then it just sort of taking a bit longer to get in the flow of writing as a band and writing things together, and the sort of back and forth process that entails.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of that also happened, I can imagine, yeah, because you're saying with Annihilator, obviously big band, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things happening. So you guys were mostly writing online, I take it, between those moments that you could actually do that then?
In one case, literally writing online as a live stream online. Do you remember that, Rich? We wrote the song Disconnected, with the help of our fans. We all piled up in Rich's studio at home and turned a webcam on for a weekend and just spent the whole weekend there just jamming the song out. So one of the songs was literally written online with the help of our fans.
Yeah, that was quite fun, and we actually took, like, suggestions from people. Like, we'd get to a certain point, like, we get to, like, a pre-chorus, and then we'd say, okay, well, where do you guys think this should go next? Like, and then we maybe try a couple of riffs and, like, okay, so which one of those do you think goes here? And then people would say, like, well, what if you wrote lyrics at this point about this? Or, like, that kind of thing. And we were bouncing it off the fans who were actually throwing us ideas as we were writing.
And what year was this? When did you guys do this?
What was that? 2015, maybe?
Because
15,
it's interesting
16?
that you're saying that, because
it was probably 2015.
2015, which is, like, it's interesting because nowadays we have Twitch, we have all these different platforms where people are doing live things, but that wasn't exactly the norm back then. Far from it. I mean, even the part of YouTube was still in a relative infancy at that point in time.
No, it was a pretty crazy idea we just kind of threw out there, not because it was a phenomenon that everybody was doing, but it was like, what if we do this? And we didn't even know if it was going to work.
Yeah, because it wasn't like a super fancy setup. It was literally just one webcam in the corner and everything going into the PC and then being streamed out of that.
Oh, yeah, right. So they did hear, like, proper audio, but it was just one webcam registering all of you guys. Yeah, okay. So obviously with COVID, a lot of people got into these kind of live streaming situations, but that is almost a precursor to what is more of a norm these days, I would say.
Absolutely.
And I don't actually remember how that idea came about, to be honest. Like, I think we were just looking for something new to do, like an idea where we could write something together and make it interesting for people. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we think this is going to be the next big thing, so we're going to, like, jump on first. It was just like...
I don't think anyone could have predicted a lot of things that are happening right now in general, but still, it is interesting to think about that. But then, so basically we have to fast forward to 2019, like, it feels weird, but then In Veritas came out. What was it like to work on that record, besides the fact that you had to do it in small bursts? And then I'm also looking at Andy first. What was it like for you to basically have to wait partially for the album to happen, because Rich was also occupied? Were you also doing other things at the same time then? How was that working for you in that period? I
think pretty much from about there to about there is what happened during that wait behind me in the wall. So I was involved in a lot of different projects, guitar, vocals, and so on. So I always try to keep busy because otherwise your voice goes. So for me, it wasn't really an issue of waiting. I figured a good thing is worth waiting for. So that wasn't really a problem. the really cool thing for me was that this time around, Rich actually asked me to write the lyrics and the melodies, and I ended up writing everything except one song, I think. I don't exactly remember, but most of it is actually is my stuff, which was really cool. I mean, because Aeon Zen had always been very much Rich's thing. I sang what came in the mail, and I showed up where it said on the airplane ticket, and it was a great ride, and this time around it was like, okay, I want you to be the storyteller, and to tell the story of this album, and it was a cool, huge responsibility and something I really looked forward to taking on.
I can also imagine, because you've already been working together for a while, it's also like, what was it hard to do that, or was it really just something that came natural because you've already been singing Rich's songs for so long?
I tell you what, when somebody sends you a song and the song is like 9 minutes long and it has 3 different time signatures and it changes tempos, and it's like you start to wonder, what do I put on this?
Yeah.
What kind of singing does even go? So it takes a long time to internalize the song, because I mean, part of the reason why Rich can write an album every 6 months is because it's his stuff. He's already internalized it.
Yeah.
Whereas I had to kind of marinate myself in the sound of this song. Okay, and then go like, all right, I think I know what the vocals are supposed to be like now. But that took months, to actually just figure it out, because this isn't a 3-chord, 3-minute song.
No. No, and Rich, what was that like for you in terms of what did that feel like for you to let it out to Andy, to give it to him?
It was actually a bit of a relief, because like when I'm writing an album or a song or anything, like usually the thing that I put off as much as I can is like lyric writing, basically, because it's not like the reason that I got into this. Like, I'm mostly like a musician who enjoys writing all the notes and like playing all the riffs and that sort of thing. But then of course you can't really do unless you want to be instrumental, which like it's not really for me.
No, exactly.
But you just need lyrics and vocals to go over it. And of course, when the band started, that was the only option I had, was to do that myself. But then at this point, of course, knowing Andy and knowing what he can do, and also like I'd mixed a couple of Silent Call albums by that point, I think.
Yeah,
so of course, then I knew like
lyrics and melodies for those.
Exactly, yeah. And the last one of those that I mixed that you sang on was like this concept album as well, wasn't it? So then, of course, I knew like Andy is perfectly fine with like grandiose concepts and big epic like songs and music and that sort of thing. So in that case, it was kind of like a bit of a relief, and I think it just kind of felt natural as well.
But I remember that was your one rule. It was not allowed to be a concept album, because we had already put out 2 in a row. So you told me, the one thing you told me was like, don't make it a concept album.
Yeah.
And so I tried to write very diverse songs about a lot of different
things. Yeah, so like in spite of what I just said, yeah, because coming off the back of like 2 like flowing concept albums from start to finish, basically like one continuous piece of music in a way, like it was time to do something different. And it felt like with the way the band had changed, actually writing together, like it felt like a bit more of a fresh start in a way. It's kind of maybe a bit easier to write, especially the first time writing together as a band, to do it in that way, where you're writing standalone songs. Then it's easier for one guy to come in and say like, well, I have an idea for a song with a couple of riffs like this, maybe we can see where it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than like you have to say, well, actually, I've already got like the first 15 minutes and it doesn't really fit in with what we've got. So, like maybe if you're lucky, we'll stick it in.
Yeah,
like,
right.
We could actually then take ideas that anyone had and develop it into a song. Like the one I particularly remember was in the middle of The Last Alive. It has like this, it's basically based on a bass tapping riff that Steve Burton, our drummer, had, because he was actually doing it. I think it was for like a university course or something. He had to basically compose a piece of music and then play over it for a while.
Oh.
And he said to me, like, I've got this, like, I think it was a 2-bar riff. Like, could you maybe just, like, play it and embellish on it a little bit so I have, like, a bit more time to work with? So I took that and I made it into this, like, 3-4 minute instrumental section.
Whoops.
And sent it back to him. He was like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this?
and your response was like, oops!
Exactly, and it was things like that. And then like the beginning of that song was a couple of riffs that Alistair had, and then by the time that was done, sending it over to Andy, and then of course I don't have to worry about melodies and stuff. I can make this as crazy as I want, you know.
Andy, I am so sorry to hear that.
It was a challenge, but we got through it, and I think we ended up with a sound. I think we called it Gent Justin Timberlake or something like that. That was like a brief for the album, because there's a lot of because when the music is really rhythmic, you can get kind of funky over it. So there was a lot of like, you know, Justin Timberlake, Michael Jackson stuff over there, so which was a risk. But it was fun to do, and I think it ended up going really.
But those are some of my favorite parts because it's different.
Yeah, but that's the point. It's like
you don't hear other people doing that.
It's interesting because that also kind of ties into, you know, the discussion that will probably, if humanity dies from the apocalypse, then there will still be two organisms asking each other what is prog and what isn't. Doing something like that is, especially in your case, when you look at the body of your work and you're able to say, let's do this. It's really progressive in a way. It's also a way of just pushing your sound forward.
Right, because that's the way the beats fell and the song, and that kind of what sounds best over it.
Because I think a lot of the music on this album is more technical, like more notey, maybe, than the previous ones. Like it has a lot less of a keyboard influence than most of the previous albums, and I think that's sort of more of a modern metal kind of influence, more so than like, say, A Mind's Portrait, Face of the Unknown, which has more of that kind of 70s prog rock kind of vibe.
Right, yeah.
At least in terms of the keyboards. Whereas on this one, it was more like, because it was written as a band, it tended to be me writing stuff on the bass or guitar riffs that then Alistair would embellish, him writing guitar riffs, and because we don't have a standalone keyboard player, because I always do the keyboards, that's kind of how that came about, in that there weren't as many parts that came off the keyboard.
That's also what then makes it fresh in a way, perhaps, because
exactly.
Because you're not doing the same template again.
When it was time, I think, maybe to do lyrics and melodies, like that's kind of something that makes it tougher, because a lot of times with the way I write, at least, it's the keyboards that kind of give you that grounding sort of tonality.
The
where
chords
you've got
and such,
your chord progression. Exactly, and then you've got your guitar riffs moving around them, doing whatever, whereas this one was more like, well, you know, there's the guitar riffs, and then you can create that grounding with the vocals, which of course then takes a bit more time to internalize and get your head around.
Judging as an outsider when listening to this, it's like I can hear that every album has its own identity really strongly, but at the same time, like I feel that In Veritas is the one that, to me, it actually jumps out the most in that regard. I would almost call it like weirdly fusion-like, or you know, that kind of influence, because there's so many noodly riffs going on, as opposed to like the other records also have noodly riffs, but here the noodly riffs are basically the standard riffs. You know, that's almost the whole record.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Andy was saying with the phases. Like the way I see it is maybe a little bit different, because I see them as sort of pairs of albums. Like you've got the first two, which were written around the same time, have sort of similar kind of sounds and vibes to them, that sort of prog rock kind of influence I was talking about. Then the next two are the concept albums, which are getting more into the sort of noodly storytelling, that kind of stuff. And then there's this album, which was a band and is more metal than the previous ones. So like that's kind of how I separate them in my mind, at least.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Well, then we're heading into the final release, and in that sense, well, the end of the end of this whole story, and we're heading into Transversal. A lot has already been said about this record. Obviously, the promotion is going. This very video you're watching right now, for those viewers at home, very meta. But yeah, this is obviously a part of the promotion for that very record. But still, there might be people who are watching this in the far future. Hello, people in 2030. You look great. Love your hair.
Yeah,
Rich,
we're sorry for all the stuff that our generation did.
Yeah, we're so sorry. But Rich, if you have to look at Transversal, what is it as opposed to the rest of your career? What makes Transversal stand out as opposed to the rest of the Aeon Zen releases?
I think it's more reflective. Like that would be the big thing for me, is like the emotion behind it. Because if you don't know already, the reason for this album is to bring a close to Aeon Zen. So of course, like there's no way you're going to get that across without it being maybe more personal or more emotive. And in terms of the music, like I think even that feels maybe a bit more sort of melancholic, or just sort of more introspective, because the way it was written was that the majority of the music was written prior to Aeon Zen. Most of this music was written around 2007, but just the music. There was no lyrics, no melodies or anything. And I had a demo of this song that was, I think it was about 27 minutes long, and it was something that I always wanted to use, but it never seemed to fit. Like, there was never the right time to do it. Like, in between how things were going with touring and then like doing the concept albums, the way they were sounding, like the sound of this was so far from where the band were at that point. And then we became a band like contributing, writing together, that again, this didn't make sense at that time. So when it came time to actually say like, okay, well, I think it's sort of come to a natural conclusion to maybe put this to bed. So how can we actually do that in a way where it's not just like we put out a Facebook post like, yeah, thanks, bye. Like,
okay, bye.
Which happens with lots of bands. And, you know, it's always a sad thing when that happens.
Funnily enough, Rich, I don't remember there being a band meeting where we kind of decided that this is going to be the last one. It was just something that kind of grew on us as this was being written. And this was before I wrote the lyrics. It was just kind of like, we all kind of knew that this is probably going to be the last one. And that's sort of one of the things I wanted to check with you when I was about to start writing lyrics. And I said, hey, Rich, I have this feeling that like all of us kind of think that this is the last record. And I would like to write lyrics that reflect that. And, you know, just before I do that, can you just confirm for me that this feeling is right? And you know, you kind of had a thought about it and it's like, yeah, then let's make it the last one. And so I really kind of went on this journey and wrote really kind of introspective personal lyrics, not about a machine that destroys the universe or about any kind of high-flying metal concept, but lyrics that are about the journey that we made and the shows that we've played and, you know, all the plane rides and car rides and sleepless nights and everything we've had and all the wonderful people we've met. And for that reason, I think it's probably the most honest music we've ever written, because it's so deeply personal.
And I think the way it worked out using this music, because it never had any lyrics or melodies. So in a way, that was kind of prophetic in that we could use this for that purpose, because the music kind of sounded like that. But of course, I'd been listening to it for like on and off for say like 13 years. And then it came time, I was like, okay, we need lyrics. Like, shit. I don't know what to do over this. Like, I can't imagine it having vocals over it because I'm so used to hearing it as it is. But then, of course, by that point, again, it was another one of those things where the band had just progressed to the point where it was possible to do this. Yeah. So then I could hand that off to Andy and say, like, here it is, what do you think? Do what you would do over this. Because I know that by that point, Andy is also the sound of Aeon Zen.
Well, I mean, for you, Rich, obviously it's a full circle because you're finally using that piece of music that you wanted to share with the world for a longer time.
It is literally full circle, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's this weird spiral in that, Andy, you made your own tour around that. You know, you circled around that by first being one of the guests and then becoming the live singer, and now you're and then around Inveritas you were like the writer. So in a weird way, it's like your circle kind of aligned with Rich's at this point in time by being able to do this, which is also weirdly poetic and really cool when you realize that is happening.
It's been one hell of a ride.
But I think it's one of those things, like, we didn't realize any of this when we were actually doing it, apart from like, yeah, this kind of feels like it's naturally going to be the last one. Because even though I sort of had a hunch of that when I was going back and re-recording the song and adding bits and that sort of thing, like, I don't think it was until you, Andy, actually said, like, I'm getting this feeling, that I actually really sat down and thought about it and was like, actually, yeah, that makes sense. Because even though I'd had those thoughts, it wasn't actually decided that that's what it was going to be.
I can also imagine that it is almost scary to say it out loud in a way, you know, that if you're the one, Rich, because it's your project, you've been working on it for so long, and it's also like, okay, we have multiple people with a voice now, so it might almost feel inappropriate to be the one to make that claim then. So then weirdly enough, when Andy is the one saying it, it's like, yeah, this is what I...
In a way, it's kind of like a sort of, like a validation.
Yeah.
Or it's sort of, it just means that maybe the music brings you to that point rather than trying to force anything. because that's the sound that the music has, and that's the vibe that everyone is feeling at that point, rather than trying to like, I'm the dictator, so I'm saying the band's going to end now. Like, that's not how it happened.
I talk to people about this and say, this isn't ending because somebody, you know, went to a different band, or because two guys got into a fight, or because one guy slept with another guy's girlfriend, or anything like that. We told the story, and then in the end, you can kind of tell when the story's over. And you can tell when it's time to let somebody else talk. And in that same way, I think we all just simultaneously got that feeling that, like, we've said the things we came here to say, and thanks a lot for giving us your ears and your eyes, and, you know,
see you later wherever and in whatever situation.
Yeah, and all of us are going to go on to do other things, and I'm sure we'll all collaborate in the future. You know, it's just going to be a different story with a different message, and, you know, different people involved, and so on.
We've reached the end of the chronology now. We've basically talked all the way through every record, and of course you could say a million things about every album and every experience, and it's also something that people might be able to get out of the music by just revisiting these records and listening to it, and you know, diving into the material that is there. If you're now looking back on this whole adventure and everything that happened, and obviously Andy already said it was quite a ride, but if you had to summarize, and I'm going to ask both of you to do that individually. If you have to summarize what Aeon Zen was in terms of an emotion, in terms of what it represented, how would you summarize it? And Andy, you may start.
I'll do what I usually do and avoid the deep question by going shallow, and I will say Aeon Zen is the only band I've ever been a part of where no one gets drunk, which for me, because I don't drink, always made it a very safe place. Nobody got loud, nobody yelled at anybody, nobody threw beer bottles, nobody didn't show up for the tour bus because they were too drunk or hungover to show up. This was a band that felt like a bunch of friends, you know, going through life together, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for the guys in this band. That's really how it feels to me. So what better way than to give like my best friends a send-off like this? Okay,
that's really touching. I like that. And Rich, I believe it would make the most sense to give you the final word, because you're the one who started this mess. So
so get yourself out of that then. I think for me, like, this started when I was 17, 18. So for me, this has been like the most constant thing throughout almost the majority of my life. So in terms of that, that's like, it's basically representative of my journey through life, because that's what it's represented for me. And having those different stages and different sounds, just sort of, if I listen to one of those albums, that takes me back to where I was at that point in my life, and just sort of the whole journey is basically the journey of my life.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how it feels to me. And then sort of ending that journey, in a way, it is sad. And of course, like Andy said, we're not going to stop. And it's not like we're one of those bands where we break up because people don't like each other and we go our separate ways and like talk shit about each other and this sort of thing. It's like, of course we're going to keep in touch and probably work on things in the future together and all this sort of thing. So it's, in that way, it's not like an ending, but it's almost like a separate path, which is like, again, transversal. You know, it's like a cutting of lines or systems. You know, it's going to go in a different direction now. And for me, it's basically, that's just what it is. It's been my life, and now life is going in a different direction.
Well, thank you guys very much for this interview. It was great to talk to you about all of this, and thank you, the viewers at home, for watching this featurette. Of course, feel free to get your hands on this record, because you know it would help them a lot if you did so. Get one of those t-shirts, etc. And even if you don't, just thank you for listening and being a part of this. Is there any final thing you guys want to share with the audience? Andy, anything you want to say?
Well, if it wasn't for Aeon Zen, we wouldn't have met you. So that was awesome.
That's kind of nice. And Rich, anything else you want to add at the end?
I mean, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, because, you know, this has been such a big part of my life, and to share that with people is not something that everyone gets to do. And to have that privilege of letting people in with those emotions and those parts of my life that have been intimate or wacky or just kind of stupid and absurd. Like, whatever it is, everyone that has listened to the band has been with me through that. So I'd just like to say thank you for being there.